Welcome to Tempo Living's podcast, Tempo Talks. Throughout the series, we'll be talking all things construction, business, and a few things in between along the way. We'll be interviewing real people in the industry who get things done. The ever-changing dynamic and landscape of the home building industry has been at the forefront of our guest's mind throughout his career, with a real passion for innovation and always looking at how we can do things better. The only constant would have been his unwavering passion for the Manly Sea Eagles and also his love for the Beatles. Martin Apap, welcome.
Thanks, Jeremy. Pleasure to be here. So, long time, make me feel really old, 45 years. It's probably a little bit goes back further than that, in that for as long as I can remember going to site with Dad and his four brothers on site. So it's hard to say actually when I started. So building's been it's in the family, it's in the blood. It's something that we live for.
You would have seen a lot change over that 45-year period, especially coming out of COVID and where things have gone now. Earliest memory, and I guess any stories around a baptism of fire with your apprenticeship?
Probably around the thing that really stands out, saying we grew up working in a family business, with Dad and his four brothers on site, was that real sense of looking out for one another. Back in those days, we didn't have WHS laws, but it was a common sense thing. And, I often say common sense is not common anymore. And that's probably looking back on those days where everyone looked out for each other. And so, there was that real sense of looking out for one another. I've had the pleasure, as I said, doing my apprenticeship. Two of my best mates started their apprenticeship in the same year that I did, and we've been best mates ever since. I'd probably consider them family, and one of them works with us, and that's been a constant. So Paul Caruana's been a constant in all those years. And it's not only the passion, it's the care. I think that's probably the word to use, the care that we had not only for what you did and the pride in what you presented. So, I'm one of those dads that every time we drive down the street, I'm pointing out to the kids, I built that. So they're quick to send memes through to me or have a laugh of that. But it's something that I'm passionate about and very proud of.
I think we can see that as well through the growth of Tempo. The 6-7 years we've all worked together, everyone's got that quite family-orientated business approach where we're not just a corporate, we're here to get the job done, but we take our people with us, and working with them, we all get a kick out of the success that we've had so far.
Yeah, look, I think that's a big part of our culture and our business and of who we are, in that it's more important that we have the team that understands the why, what we're trying to, the intent of what we're trying to achieve. I think once the team gets that and understands the why, then your passion it makes sense to them. So you're not having this battle that you're trying to convince people of what you're trying to achieve.
That rubs off on customers, I have no doubt, from the sales sense, from taking a customer through that pre-construction process into construction. They see that we live and breathe it, builds confidence with them. But speaking about buyer profile, how has that changed over the last 45 years?
Look, it's there's an old saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So there's a lot of constants around that, and I think that we talked about culture, and the biggest thrill I get is seeing a testimonial come in and single one of your team out, and that I get a massive thrill out of that, and then to ring that customer up and hear their reaction, it was like, wow, you're executive general manager of business and you've actually called me. I think that then really resonates and hits home that we actually do care even though we might not be in touch with the customer every day, that's something that we're very caring of.
Do you think there's a sense of overcomplication in our industry now?
Oh, definitely. So, going back to my apprenticeship, it's, we worked for a builder that also subdivided land. So, basically it was walk up, go into a display home, and if you like that display home, they tell you, well, you can have that home on lot 50, 80 or 120, and that's the color. And people were happy with that because they could see, they could touch, they could feel that it was an aspiration to be in a home. I think over the years we've overcomplicated it, down to the sense that, I often say that in my role as in the tier one, where we build 1,000 homes, and we were a volume custom home builder, and by that I meant that no two homes would have been the same. So Tempo Living has been really born out of those challenges that we saw getting to site, the time you spent in pre-construction, where really all you're seeing is bits of paper. You're not seeing a physical house get built.
What comes to mind for me is the term, I guess, buyer's fatigue or customer fatigue. They go through the process around meeting a customer or a sales consultant at a display home, picking their house, the facade, but that doesn't end there. Once they've signed a tender and contract, they move through the process around selections. And we've experienced it in a past life where there's 4 or 5 days that a customer needs to take of annual leave to actually pick the selections of their home. Coming back to that overcomplication, do you think there's merit in pre-selecting and having interior design curated by a professional that allows the customer then just to pick, the dark or the light scheme and get through that process a lot quicker?
Yeah, look, I think for the type of customer that the Tempo is wanting to attract, definitely. So, we're certainly not saying or expecting that our model is for everybody, but the thing that resonates with me was, the most common comment that our site managers would get from their first phone call, it'd be like, "Thank goodness I'm out on site. It's just taken so long to get here." And that wasn't as a reflection of inadequacies or, through that pre-construction process. I think it was just more customers didn't have a real expectation or managed expectation around that's what it takes. You're gonna have to take 4 days off work to go and have a look at bricks, to have a look at roof tiles or roofing material, then another day to go and talk to the electrician about your upgrades, then selecting your colours with so many options, pricing, and then being so confused. I remember speaking with some customers that by the end of the journey, they don't even remember what they've selected. So, I think that in our model, we did that heavy lifting up front, where we engaged an interior designer. We came up with colour selections that were on trend, and we felt in some cases ahead of trend. We consulted with those experts that knew that subject matter. So, our wall and floor tile supplier, for example, they travel around the world and see what the trends are, and we engaged with them and found out, well, this is where trends are going, and we implemented that into our colour selection. So you're not sacrificing anything, you're not giving away anything, and in fact, I think you're saving yourself the time and the heartache.
You make the point around time and the heartache, but also the cost involved. Land prices, we've seen where they've gone over the last 3 or 4 years. They settle on that land, and potentially the customers don't realise at that early stage that they're making repayments on, could be up to $1 million block of land. So it's a significant cost that they have to hold for that 12-month, 18-month period. So there is a benefit, I guess, to getting that customer through the pre-construction process and onto site. How important do you think it is, though? And is it a case of the customers not knowing? And maybe what are some tips for that customer base around asking the right questions so they're fully aware of what commitment they do have to make?
But there's probably a few questions to ask around it, and probably the first one is understanding yourself as a customer is, when do I want to be in my home? Because if you do have 2 years plus, well then fine, go down the old well-worn trodden path of going out to all these selections and et cetera. But the old saying, time is money. If that's your motivation, well then ask the potential builder that you're speaking with. So how long does it take me to get my selections all done? When will you actually start preparing my submission drawings and my approvals? Is it after registration, or do you do you do a lot of that work up front so that when the land's registered, you're on site as quickly as possible? So I think it's, a lot of builders are very focused on build times. That is very important. But I think the most important question is, well, how long does it take to actually get to the starting line, to actually start building the home?
So we've covered off customers' expectations and asking the right questions around pre-construction, site start. But from a business perspective, we've always had the view that a job sitting on a shelf during that pre-construction timeframe is a liability because we don't start to realise the revenue until the slab's poured. How crucial is it for business owners to keep that front of mind? And what feedback would you have for people starting out in business?
Look, it should be the number one focus rather than how important is it. It's the number one focus in as a running a business. If you're not getting revenue in the door, you're falling behind pretty quickly. So in speaking with builders that are starting out that ask those questions, sort of that you have to be laser focused on when's my next revenue coming in. What does my revenue forecast look at? When am I getting that site start done? I think a lot of builders don't understand that it's not until you get your PC claim that you're actually realising your margin on the job. So it's vital.
And you've done a bit of business coaching along the way. How important is it to have the right team behind you to set you up for success?
You're only as good as your team. So without having the right people in place, you're really going to struggle. And it's a typical builder that's gone from the tools, got their builder's license. Unfortunately, we don't teach those people skills in any of the courses and understanding how to manage people, how to manage customer expectations. They're really the two greatest skills. I go as far as calling them, they're a talent that you can teach it, but you really have to live and have that as part, a cornerstone of your business. Another
key factor I would imagine is having financial acumen and your experience starting out after your apprenticeship, moving into a subcontractor role. How was that learning curve around managing finance?
Look, I was very fortunate in that I had one of those fathers that didn't want me to be a builder, didn't want me to be a carpenter, I should say. So, when I had finished HSC and had tried work experience working in an accounting department, I quickly knew that being in an office wasn't for me at that point in time. But also, what it did teach me was the importance of financial management. So, moving on to trade and then starting our own subcontractor business, we're always very financially astute and looking at ways to further our knowledge around that. So, then moving into management, doing some management courses again, and really focused on finance.
Coming back to the customer focus, we often hear the term fixed price tender, fixed price contract. Why does it differ across the industry between builders? And in your opinion, what is a true fixed price contract?
This is a little bit of a good talking point, because fixed price with a little asterisk at the end of it is not a fixed price. So, I often joke around and say the best thing that happened in the car industry was the drive away, no more to pay. If we could have something like that in building, that'd be great. And I think that that's where that's been a focus, but that's really been an idea that we wanted to take forward. And as a builder, we should know what it's going to cost you to put down piers in an estate that you've built multiple homes in. So I've always been a person that thought about there's got to be a better way of doing this, and I'd much rather fix the price up front than having the hard conversation with a customer around, well, we should have known, we could have known, but it was an easy way out to just pass on the cost to you plus a margin.
And that's all about building trust with the customer.
Definitely. So again, it's building that trust, but as well as that, I think it's being a true professional in that we know what it costs to build a home. We know what's required to build a home. Being big enough, humble enough to ask the people that are subject matter experts. Whether it be around basics, ask your basics consultant to explain how it works, and understanding that there's the more things that you fix, then that's a much better experience for the customer.
Do you think there's a sentiment around there that they just want to get the customer through the door, sign them up, and worry about the hard stuff later?
I think there is an element of that in that it's, well, if we get volume in, eventually numbers will fall out the other end. And again, it depends on what your business model is. If you want the big high volume, well then, those businesses accept 30, 40, 50% cancellation rates. Other business owners are more focused on winning a job on trust and building as close to 100% of those upfront deposits that you take.
Let's talk about design innovation for a minute. We've seen blocks trending smaller, especially in the Sydney market. Central Coast and Hunter are starting to follow that trend as well. How hard is it now to come up with new designs on narrower blocks, tighter blocks? And what do you see moving forward around innovation? Part of that too, we see intergenerational families coming on board, growing families. The first home buyer market is very different from what it was probably 10 years ago. With design, what do you see as the key elements and where the trends are going?
I think it's more important to focus on what I call what accommodation you have in a home, rather than calling it the ABC 36. It's bigger is not always better. So it's from a design perspective, I think it's about making every square meter work as hard as it can in the home. We work hard to be able to afford our house and land. Land and building costs are more expensive, so it's vital that we have designs that suit the blocks of land, but more importantly, that those blocks, that the house size is getting the most out of what you can fit on that block.
So I imagine it would be reducing unnecessary space around hallways, opening up living areas, keeping that maximised space for the intergenerational families with a ground floor bathroom and bedroom. What mistakes do you think are the most prominent, and where do you see things could improve?
I often speak with customers and they'll say that, I want a 36 square home, without really understanding, well, what actually do you want? And I suppose it's a trait, sometimes a frustrating trait that I have, in that I'll always ask the question, say, so what does that look like? What do you want? It's more important, I think, to understand that. And, we talked about intergenerational bedrooms, guest bedrooms on ground floor. We're seeing a lot more of that, in that, again, we're spending more time, we're getting more visitors coming to our home. We have an aging population. So they're all really important. And even the way we live, within a home, whereas, bedrooms in the past, you'd have to accommodate a study area, whereas we don't have that. We have mobile devices where you can sit anywhere in the house. So, getting your room sizes to be functional without being oversized is very important.
Every time you turn the TV on at night, one of the most prominent articles or talking points is housing crisis, the housing shortage. I have no doubt that the industry we've picked will be generational, and we have enough work for decades to come. What has the building industry done for you and your family throughout your career?
Look, I think it's done so many things. It's given me some lifelong friends. Even builders that are friendly competitors, I'll call them. Friendships with them. I'm heavily involved with Housing Industry Association, and I do a bit of volunteer work there. So that's sort of opened me up and introduced me into having a real will to help and make things better. Around that, I mentioned earlier, it's always looking at how do we make things better. I think if you really want to make things better, well, then you've got to go all the way. So, yeah, I'm involved with HIA and do a little bit of judging with them. That has really given me a sense of achieving things that I don't think I can achieve as an individual. And I'm a real believer in teamwork and achieving things as a group.
So I was a HIA apprentice back in 2009, 2010, started my career. And you talk about the family connection. So my grandfather was the one that pushed me into a carpentry apprenticeship, and he was actually, through HIA, was my first host trainer or boss, as you'd call him. But we had a rule before we actually started on site on the first job that no one was to know who I was in terms of the relationship with him, and vice versa. And he's my grandfather on my mother's side, so our last names weren't aligning. But that introduction, I was quite nervous around, and probably a stigma. Apprentice on site, it's going to be a baptism of fire, and you've got to earn your stripes. And it was actually the complete opposite. And I think it was around partnering and surrounding yourself with people who are skilled, but also they've got that nurturing aspect. And I think I was pretty fortunate in that respect. And then working with the HIA, being placed with two other host trainers. There was a top floor edition home builder and then a custom builder. The avenues that opened up and got me into the project home world, I never saw the career path channeling or being paved the way it was. And then to come full circle, working with guys like yourself, and then also taking on a committee role with the HIA Planning and Environment Committee, and then reconnecting with the likes of Gary Rudnick from HIA Apprentices. It's and that was 15 years ago. It's pretty amazing. And to your point, the sense of community, but also being able to give back. The people that will change the industry, I think, are the guys working on the ground. You've got the politicians out there, you've got the bureaucrats. They've got an idea, but it's the guys on the ground. In terms of apprentices and the shortage that we've got now, what are some of the answers you think that we need to consider to help build the industry back up to where it was, considering the number of houses we've got to build?
Unfortunately, I don't think there's no silver bullet that's going to fix it. So, I read an article over the weekend, when it talked about the many decades of neglect or inaction. And I think that, to turn it around is going to take it's going to take a lot of work. There's so many things there that need to be addressed. One thing that I have confidence in is the leadership team at HIA, very well connected. We're very well respected within political ranks. So we have a voice, and we're starting to see some things that we've been talking about for years now are actually being listened to. And, I think we still have a way to go to that, the messaging that we have around, achieving a career in building is a noble career to chase. And that's, that's for all genders, for all, we're looking for a diversity in that space. And I think that we're on the right road. And I think that, we just got to keep on that road, because we're not going to fix it overnight. Unfortunately for politicians, we're not going to fix it in a term. It's going to take a lot longer. And I think we need to have a short, medium and a long-term view and action plan.
Coming back to apprentices and maybe speaking on a personal note, any funny stories or war stories that you can disclose without breaching work health and safety policies of 2025?
Oh, yeah, I think that's, what's the saying? What goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas. So I think there's a lot of that. Look, I think that, and I mentioned earlier that two of my best mates were all apprentices. So whenever we get together, we'll often have laughs around, some of the shenanigans we got up to. And whilst we probably stretched the rules, look, we didn't do anything that was stupidly dangerous. I think that was certainly, it wouldn't have been accepted by by Dad and the uncles who had probably got a clip around the ear, which you couldn't do anymore today anyway. But there were a few, and I think I'll leave it at that.
Talking work health and safety, how far has that come in the last 40 years? We want apprentices, contractors, even in our business, people to return home safely to their families. Talk to me a bit about that and how that's all changed.
Look, I think a lot of it has been around. Certainly, there's been some great improvements around that space. Things like roof rails and void protection certainly within our sector have really been game changers. And I think the thing that I'm really happy to see around is that level of communication that you talked about hosts and bosses have with their staff. Whereas, in our time it was, you're expected to understand it and you learnt pretty quickly if you did something wrong. Whereas I think that your communication with the apprentices, the mentoring, and with organisations like HIA and other industry bodies that hosts apprentices and have mentors there for them. That's a huge improvement that we have compared to when I did my apprenticeship.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point. I guess now just to wrap things up, across those 40 years in your career, anything that you've seen that's been sort of unexpected or out of the ordinary compared to your cookie cutter approach?
But probably the one that does come to mind, and it wasn't that it was, I suppose, a ridiculous request, but did have a client where the room to store his Harley Davidson was more important than the rest of the house. So everything had to be right, had to be off the garage. It was a design getting that to work. So that one stands out, and we ended up with a really happy client. The wife had to make some sacrifices to get that to work and from her budget, but overall, very happy customer.
One for me that comes to mind is we were building a over 55s project and a customer request came in. They wanted some air conditioning vents in their garage. We asked the question, we thought, this is a bit odd. It's down in southern Sydney where it does get a bit chilly and gets hot in summer. And it was so he could work on his toy train set. And for us, we were thinking, how is that going to work with, you leave the car on, carbon monoxide, a bit of exhaust smell coming through the house. It was obviously a clear no, but it's interesting to see as the generations get older, what their sort of nuances are in terms of specification and how they go about it. I think at the moment we had to just tell him it was a firm no, and he had to head down to Kathmandu to pick up a couple of jackets. Well, Martin, thanks so much for your time today. Really enjoyed hearing about your career today. Not over yet. There's a lot more to do. I'm sure you've got a lot to still achieve, but also your business acumen and providing our viewers with some insights and some tips and tricks around overall business operations. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks, Cameron.
Well, that's all we have time for today. But in our next episode, stay tuned. We'll be diving deeper into the construction realm.